The modern seeker rarely meets truth in a cathedral or classroom. They meet it in the feed, a river of data that still leaves the soul thirsty. Institutions crack, relationships fray. The future feels like a corridor in darkness, and a question surfaces. What if collapse is only failure, but instruction? An ancient tablet gives the method. The pattern above repeats below, outside echoes inside. So when markets shake and climates turn, the psyche also shudders. The old alchemists kept a rule. When the world becomes uncertain, build a vessel. Not for chemicals, for consciousness. Every age has its own blackening, a season when familiar identities rot away. Burnout, numbness, compulsive scrolling, addiction to noise. Earlier initiates called it the first gate of the great work. This video is a field manual for that gate. The void. Not nihilism, but a furnace, where chaos is heated until it reveals what was always real. If you stay, it changes you. Alchemy is usually misunderstood as medieval greed, a fantasy of turning lead into gold. But the older masters wrote in riddles for a reason. The lead was the heavy, repetitive self. The gold was a consciousness that no longer rusts under pressure. In one early Hermetic tale, a student begs an elder for certainty. The elder hands him a sealed jar of foul liquid and says, "Carry it for 7 days. Do not open it. Do not throw it away." By the 3rd day, the student wants to smash it, because the stench follows him everywhere. On the 7th day, he realizes the jar was never the problem. It was forcing him to face his own intolerance for discomfort. That is the first law of inner transmutation. The work begins when you stop outsourcing your inner weather to outer conditions. The old texts call this the art of the vessel. Contain the reaction, observe the pressure, and let the hidden contents speak. The void is where your old coping strategies fail. And that failure is the invitation. The Hermetic axiom is a slogan. It's a diagnostic instrument. The outer crisis amplifies the inner fracture. When a culture loses its shared story, the individual often loses their private one. You don't just witness collapse, you become a mirror of it. That's why the void feels personal. One Renaissance physician alchemist wrote that a healer who has not faced their own darkness only moves symptoms from one room to another. In modern terms, you can replace one habit with another and still remain enslaved to the same unconscious hunger. This is where depth psychology becomes a lantern. Jung saw in alchemical images a map of the psyche under pressure, symbols arising from the same deep strata where dreams are forged. And here's the uncomfortable mercy. The psyche does not dissolve you to punish you. It dissolves you to update you. The personality that survived your earlier life may be unfit for your next one. So the work begins with a sober decision. Instead of asking, "How do I escape this feeling?" you ask, "What is this feeling trying to reveal?" The old schools described transformation as a sequence of operations, not beliefs. They treated consciousness like a laboratory. You observe, you test, you record results. One French occult philosopher warned that spirituality without method becomes intoxication. Visions with no discipline, insight with no integration. The aim was always the same: to separate the essential from the noise. So let's name the engine driving the whole process: attention. Attention is the solvent. Whatever you bring steady awareness to begins to loosen, reveal its structure, and change form. This is why your worst habit fights for your focus. It is just a habit. It's a mini kingdom, built from repetition, fed by emotion, protected by excuses. The Hermeticists said the cosmos moves by law, and the psyche is no exception. When your inner world is ruled by unconscious rhythms, dopamine loops, compulsions, avoidance, your life becomes predictable, even when you swear you want freedom. The void interrupts that predictability. It breaks the machine long enough for you to see the gears. In classical alchemy, the first stage was called the blackening, when the matter decomposes and the old form cannot be maintained. It was pictured as ravens, tombs, sealed chambers, the king dead on the floor. Modern people meet this stage as a quieter horror, meaning leaks out of everything. The career you chased feels hollow. The distractions taste like ash. Even your victories stop working. Jung called this the moment the persona cracks, the social mask that helped you function. When it breaks, the shadow leaks through. Envy, resentment, cowardice, cruelty, laziness, hunger for control. Not because you became worse, because you can no longer pretend you were only the good parts. The void is the mirror that refuses flattery. Here is the critical move. Do not moralize the shadow. Don't worship it. Don't shame it. Study it. In the laboratory, smoke is information. Heat is information. A foul smell is information. Likewise, your triggers are data. Your addictions are messages written in sensation. The blackening begins to transmute the moment you stop fleeing and start reading. There is a reason this stage resembles depression, yet is like always clinical depression. Clinical depression often flattens life into gray. The alchemical blackening can make life sharper, colors more vivid, time slower, while the meaning behind things collapses. It's the same world, but the inner scaffolding has fallen away. Older Christian mystics described a divine darkness, not as punishment, but as purification. The loss of false consolations, so the soul stops clinging to substitutes. Existential philosophers, in their own language, called it the encounter with the void, when you feel in your bones that nothing guarantees your story will make sense. And that is exactly why people run. Modern culture offers elegant escape hatches, constant stimulation, chemical numbing, spiritual bypassing, outrage addiction, endless self-improvement without self-confrontation. These are not sins in a cartoon sense. They are strategies to avoid the heat. But the furnace follows you because it is outside you. So the work becomes simple and brutal. Stay present while your old identity melts. Stay conscious while the inner narrator panics. This is the beginning of real freedom, because what you can witness without becoming it no longer owns you. The alchemists had a word for the turning point: mortification, the death of the false king. This is the melodrama. It describes a psychological fact. There comes a threshold where the ego realizes it cannot command the unconscious by force. The old control strategies fail. The mind can think its way out. The body keeps reacting. The heart keeps aching. And you stand there, exposed. A small story from an old initiatory legend. A candidate is led into a room with a single lamp and told to watch it until it goes out. Hours pass. The flame shrinks. Panic rises because the candidate feels the lamp is their life. When it finally dies, the room becomes silent, and they discover something shocking. Awareness did not die with the flame. Only the illusion of control did. This is the secret use of the void. It separates awareness from its props. Many of your bad habits are attempts to relight the lamp, fast pleasures to avoid the dark. But mortification teaches a harsher skill. You can tolerate darkness without self-destruction. And once you can tolerate it, you can begin to choose differently. After enough decomposition, a strange mercy appears. separation. The old texts call it purification, the whitening. What was mixed together begins to sort itself out. You start to see the difference between pain and suffering, between sensation and story, between a craving and the command to obey it. This is where projection begins to withdraw. The enemy you were obsessed with often turns out to be an inner complex wearing someone else's face. The perfect lover becomes recognizable as a fantasy that hid your own unmet depths. The guru becomes an externalized image of the wiser self you refuse to cultivate. None of this is cynical. It's liberating. You stop bleeding your unconscious onto the world. Jung described this as reclaiming psychic content. Your energy returns, not as euphoria, but as cleanliness, less inner leakage. The alchemists compared it to washing a dark substance again and again until it reveals a pale gleam beneath. Practically, this is the stage where habits can finally be rewritten. Because you were no longer fighting the habit as a monster. You re-understanding it as a misplaced solution. You ask, what need was this serving? What emotion was it sedating? Then you build a truer method of meeting that need. This is whitening, the psyche becoming honest. The whitening is not only cleansing, it's education. You begin to develop what some esoteric philosophers call the imaginal organ, a way of seeing symbols as living realities, not childish fantasies. Dreams sharpen. Patterns speak. Your life starts to feel like a text written in metaphors. This is where the inner opposite appears. Jung named it animum and animus, the contrasexual image that mediates between ego and the deep psyche. But you don't need the jargon to recognize the event. A person, idea, or attraction destabilizes your identity and reveals a hidden dimension. You realize you are not as masculine or feminine, not as rational or emotional, not as fixed as you pretended. The psyche has more rooms than the ego admits. In older alchemical language, this is the lunar operation, meeting the reflective principle. The moon does to create light. It reveals what is present. Likewise, the inner opposite reveals what you disowned. This can be intoxicating, which is why the tradition warns of inflation, mistaking a powerful inner experience for completion. So you anchor the process in a discipline. Record your dreams, track your triggers, observe recurring symbols, and test insights in daily behavior. The measure is simple. Does your understanding reduce compulsion and increase clarity? If yes, you were on the path. If not, you were merely enchanted. Once the psyche is cleansed enough, a subtler fire ignites. Some traditions called it the yellowing, the dawn of solar consciousness. It's not happiness. It's coherence. You begin to sense an inner center that is the ego's mood of the day. Something steadier takes the helm. Jung described this as the self. Wholeness as an organizing principle. Not self as personality, but self as the pattern that wants you complete. In alchemical emblems, this appears as the birth of the inner child, or a small sun rising from dark waters. Is the same message. A new identity is forming, but it is built from performance. This stage produces a practical superpower. Meta-awareness. You can watch an impulse rise without instantly obeying it. You can feel anger without becoming possessed by it. You can feel fear without calling it truth. The Stoics hinted at this when they spoke of confirming impressions before assent. Choosing what you agree with inside your own mind. Here your daily habit work becomes surgical. Instead of, I must stop doing this, you shift to, I can see why I do this. You identify the moment the impulse begins, the microsecond of discomfort that triggers the loop. You meet that discomfort consciously. This is how the chain breaks, not through violence, but through light. Now we approach the reddening, the return of spirit into flesh. Many seekers secretly want a transformation that allows them to float above life. But the final operation is the opposite: incarnation. The work is proved not in visions, but in ordinary pressure. The alchemists wrote of multiplying the stone, meaning whatever you stabilized in yourself begins to affect the world around you, without sermons, without conversion tactics. Your presence becomes catalytic, not because you were superior, but because you were less reactive, less easily manipulated, less hungry for validation. People feel that. Systems feel that. Jung warned that individuation is not becoming special, it's becoming whole. And wholeness is paradoxical. You become more uniquely yourself while also less obsessed with yourself. The old split between spiritual and practical dissolves. You make calls. You set boundaries. You keep your word. You build habits that hold under stress. This is where collapse is reinterpreted. The outer world may still be chaotic, but the inner world becomes a stable vessel. Your choices stop being driven by panic or compensation. You act from a deeper ethic, an inner law that arises from having faced your own darkness and refusing to outsource it. But here lies the most dangerous misunderstanding. Integrated consciousness can look strange from the outside. Some traditions called it holy folly. Others hinted at the hidden philosopher, ordinary in appearance, unadvertised in power. When you are no longer governed by the crowd's hypnosis, you may violate social expectations simply by being calm where others panic. Yet the tradition is ruthless about one test. Does your freedom serve something larger than your ego? If your higher state becomes permission to be cruel, selfish, or irresponsible, it is the alchemy. It's rationalized addiction wearing incense. This is why the old occult writers insisted on equilibrium, the balancing of forces. A psyche that opens to deeper energies without ethical grounding becomes unstable. It can inflate into messiah complex, paranoia, or spiritual narcissism. In modern terms, you get a few insights and confuse them with mastery. So the reddening is not just inner light, it is disciplined embodiment. You keep a practice even when you don't feel mystical. You treat your body as an altar, meaning you sleep, you eat, you move, you limit poison. You build routines that protect awareness. Because the work is not to escape the human condition. The work is to inhabit it consciously. Let's translate this into a practical map for deleting bad habits, because that's where viewers feel the value. Every compulsive pattern has an alchemical structure. Discomfort rises. The mind generates a story. The body seeks relief. The loop rewards itself, and the identity hardens around it. In blackening, you discover the loop and stop romanticizing it. You admit the cost. You see the wreckage clearly. In whitening, you separate the components. Sensation, emotion, belief, memory. You locate the exact trigger, often a tiny moment of loneliness, shame, boredom, or fear. In yellowing, you learn to stay present through the trigger without collapsing into automatic action. And in reddening, you replace the loop with an embodied ritual that serves the same need without self-betrayal. The ancient alchemists called this solve et cogagula, dissolve and reform. Dissolve the unconscious sequence. Reform a conscious sequence. You don't merely quit a habit. You transmute it. A simple example. If you reach for distraction when anxiety rises, you were not addicted to the phone. You were avoiding uncertainty. The transmutation is willpower alone. It's building a new relationship with uncertainty, breathing into it, naming it, letting it crest and fall, then acting deliberately. That is alchemy in modern clothing. Now the void reveals its final paradox. It is not empty. It's fertile darkness. The old masters said the prima materia, the raw, chaotic substance, appears worthless until heated. Likewise, your lowest material is the proof you rebroken. It's the fuel. Think of the times you were at your worst. Often, underneath, there was a distorted virtue. Intensity without direction, sensitivity without containment, desire without wisdom. The shadow is frequently a gift twisted by fear. When you integrate it, you don't become tame. You become precise. Existential philosophers insisted that meaning is not found like a lost object. It is forged. Esoteric Christianity framed this as metanoia, a turning of the mind, a rebirth of perception. Jung would say, you don't remove suffering by denying it. You remove its poison by making it conscious. The alchemists would say, you don't kill the dragon, you extract its fire. So when collapse comes, personal or collective, you stop asking for guarantees. You build capacity. You cultivate what the ancient manuals prized above comfort. The ability to endure ambiguity without false certainty, to feel pain without self-abandonment, to act ethically without applause. And gradually, a new self forms, not as a fantasy, but as a structure that holds under stress. That is the stone. Not magic power, but incorruptibility. Presence that does not rot. So here is the complete instruction, condensed. When the world collapses, don't only rebuild the outer scaffolding, refine the inner metal. Build the vessel. Enter the furnace. Let false identities burn. Recover what is essential. Then return, not as an escapee from life, but as a conscious participant in it. The Hermetic schools insisted the deepest teachings are verified, not believed. Your proof will be ordinary, fewer compulsions, cleaner speech, stronger boundaries, more patience with discomfort, less hunger to be seen, more capacity to serve. When your inner world stops leaking chaos into every room, you become a stabilizing presence in a destabilizing time. And that is how the void becomes an ally. It forces you to stop living by inherited paradigms, political, psychological, even spiritual, and to discover the law written underneath them. Transformation is real, but it costs comfort. Rebirth is possible, but it demands surrender of the counterfeit self. If you are in the blackening right now, hear this. The rot is not the end. It is the beginning of separation. The darkness is not proof of meaninglessness. It is the womb of a new meaning you will forge with your choices. Because the final secret of the great work is simple. The gold you seek was never outside you. It was buried in the lead, waiting for a consciousness brave enough to endure the heat and recognize its own nature.